Hello everyone, it is Shakes. Hope you guys are having a fantastic day, and today I decided to tackle Counter-Strike Global Offensive versus Valorant, the battle for the best FPS game. So Valorant, the new game on the block that a lot of people are excited for, the game that supposedly takes a lot of its ideas, or most of its ideas, from Counter-Strike. A lot of people are wondering, will this be the better Counter-Strike? Will this be the best competitive FPS game of all time? And which game should I pour my time into? Now, because of this massive inquiry that a lot of people seem to be having, I decided to go through 11 different points on which game is better. This one is going to allow you to kind of pick which game should you pour your time into based on things you think are very, very important. For example, like competitiveness, fun with friends, its performance, things like that will be pretty important in wondering which game should I put my time into. So yeah, without further ado, let's just jump into the video. And if you could subscribe, it would help a lot. We are growing really, really fast. I don't even know why, but I'm just going to keep making videos because of it. So yeah, if you could subscribe, that'd be great. And without further ado, competitiveness. Now, as for competitiveness, it's going to be hard to argue against Counter-Strike Global Offensive not being the FPS god in this sense. Counter-Strike just has so many more different mechanics, like its movement is way more complex, its gunplay is way more complex, there's just a lot more complexities, like spray control, pop flashes, run boost, B-hopping, those are just a few off the top of my head, but generally there's just not going to be seemingly as much complexity in Valorant because there isn't as much complexity in the movement, and the gunplay is way simpler, which we will get into in another section. Overall, just for sheer competitiveness, CSGO will reign supreme. There's just so much more you have to understand and know, just because you know how the source engine is based around how Counter-Strike plays. There's just a bunch of different things you have to understand, and you know it has stood the test of time because of that, because you know there's just so much to learn. You know, people have tens of thousands of hours and are still learning more. So overall, it's just going to be hard to argue that Valorant, Riot's first FPS game ever, will really have a standing chance in sheer competitiveness, as does CSGO. So first off, the competitiveness will definitely go to CSGO. Now, easy to get into will actually go to Valorant. This is kind of the exact opposite of competitiveness in a way, but it is definitely a very positive thing. Valorant seems considerably easier to get into. There are simpler movement mechanics. All the mechanics you kind of have to know are kind of more surface level, which is good for someone who doesn't want to pour hundreds and hundreds or thousands of hours into a game. You know, in 100 hours, you can probably learn everything that you pretty much have to know in terms of, you know, sheer understanding, but then obviously there's a bunch of different things, you know, like map knowledge and aim ability and things of that sort that you still want to get refined, but outside of that, you're going to have a pretty good understanding of Valorant. So pretty much within your first few hours, you'll have a pretty good understanding, while in CSGO, in your first few hours, you still will probably go 0 and 18 every single match, because CSGO is just very, very harsh to a new player, doesn't teach you at all, while Valorant, on the other hand, does seem to kind of hold your hand a little bit more, especially to a point which is kind of needed in a competitive FPS where there's so much that you have to understand. So overall, I'd say for easy to get into, Valorant will definitely take this point. Now for this next subject, this one's going to be based on creativity. If you are a creative professional, or you just like testing out your skills in a creative way in terms of making maps or making skins or just making game modes, things of that sort, then you're definitely going to want to stick with CS. Riot has already said they don't really believe in community creations. They don't want anybody really making, you know, custom maps or skins and that stuff, which, you know, kind of might hurt the longevity of the game, as we've seen before with other FPS games. But overall, if you are a creative professional or just enjoy putting your creative skills to the test, there's just a bunch of different ways you can do that in CSGO. So, you know, if you are a creative kind of guy, maybe CS is what you should be leaning towards. Now for the next subject, this one's a little bit harder to go by, and you know, it's a little bit more subjective, but I thought personally, for fun with friends, which is going to be the next section, I would say Valorant kind of takes the cake for this one. Now hear me out, CSGO is pretty fun to play with your friends, but I feel like Valorant, because everybody else has a different character, it's going to be a lot more fun to do stupid strats or do any kind of strats because everybody else has a different kind of skill set. You know, they have different abilities and a lot of them mesh well together, so just playing with your friends, there's just a bunch more things you can do than playing alone, which makes it a lot more fun to play with friends. CSGO, on the other hand, while it is kind of fun to play with friends, everybody else has pretty much the same kind of abilities on the same team. You know, everybody else has the ability to buy, you know, their flashes, their smokes, and molotovs, all those kinds of things, but pretty much there's nothing that separates them, so you're gonna kind of just have a duplicated experience instead of everybody just being, you know, a different kind of character and kind of meshing their abilities all together. Now the next section is going to be performance, and I just opened up CSGO again and Valorant again just to kind of see how they compare, and again I've come to the conclusion that CSGO currently has considerably better performance compared to Valorant. Now of course we are talking about Valorant in its beta period instead of when it actually releases in summer 2020, so during that time from now to the summer release, we could probably expect them to potentially make some optimizations to make the game run a little bit better, but in its current state it does run a little bit worse. In fact, in my testing personally, I've got it actually running quite a bit worse. You know, I can usually hit around 170 to 220 FPS in Valorant, while in CSGO in similar settings pretty much all low, because you know on low settings is probably where you're going to be if you want to get the maximum amount of FPS. I got around 270 to 330 FPS so about 100 FPS difference, which is pretty massive, but obviously we will have to wait for the optimizations of Valorant. But until then, in its current state, I would definitely say CSGO runs quite a bit better. Now, along with the performance section, there has to be the stability section, and once again, CSGO will reign supreme. This also is kind of a result of it being in the beta period. In its current state, it is pretty unstable for a lot of people, not just me. Especially at the beginning of the beta, there was at least 1 or 2 people crashing every single match that I've played, and while Riot is pretty fast at releasing updates, which again we will get into later, there are still quite a few crashes in my games that I get, and a lot of people in my games get. I've almost never played a game where at least one person did not crash, so it is quite unstable in its current state, but obviously when it releases, it's not going to be nearly this unstable. But as I said before, we are talking about the games in their current state, and in its current state, CSGO is very stable, while Valorant, on the other hand, is rather unstable. Now, the next topic is going to be price, and it's going to be a little bit more in depth than the actual numerical figures, how pricey they actually are, but I'm going to have to actually give this one to Valorant. Now, both these games actually are considered free. CSGO recently came out with a free update. Not recently, in 2018, they came out with a free update that made the game entirely free, while Valorant, on the other hand, in summer 2020, will release as entirely free, and the beta is actually free if you do get your hands on a code. So then why am I saying that Valorant is winning this section? Well, it's actually for a little bit of a deeper reason. Now, while Counter-Strike Global Offensive is technically free, you're definitely going to want to buy the $15 Prime upgrade. The reason for that is something that I'll go into in the next section, but pretty much, if you're on the non-Prime version, there's going to be a lot of hackers, there's going to be a lot of griefers, just a bunch of people that you don't want to really queue with, and if you get the Prime upgrade, you're kind of telling the game that yes, I'm willing to put in $15 extra, so I'm probably not going to waste my account, hacking or griefing. Now, while you technically can get Prime for free, the elite way to play Counter-Strike, it will take you at least 100 hours in my experience to get to level 21, which unlocks Prime for non-Prime users, but you probably don't want to play 100 hours with these kinds of players, even though, it has been cut down a little bit because of VAC is slowly getting better. But overall, pretty much to unlock the real way to play CSGO, you're going to want to pay $15, or, when it goes on sale to $7.50. On the other hand, though, Valorant is entirely free, so if you want to have the maximum experience, you don't have to pay a dime. Unless, of course, you buy an account off someone who was farming keys, so you can get into the beta early without actually watching the streams. But that's a rare case, And the next section is going to be cheating, and I touched on this a slight bit in the previous section, but cheating is definitely going to go to Valorant. Not cheating specifically, but like the point for cheat. You get the point. CSGO used to kind of be notorious for having a lot of cheaters, but that was generally made by people who didn't really understand the game and just thought every good player was a cheater. But generally, CSGO does have quite a few cheaters in non-Prime matchmaking. It has dumbed down a little bit, as I said before, because of Valve's anti-cheat getting a little bit smarter, but the Valorant developers seem to already understand this, and they have systems in place to stop things like wall hacks or aim hacks. Exactly how effective these systems will be for actually kicking out cheaters, we don't exactly know just yet, but at least we already know that they have things in place to stop the cheaters. Future Shakes here. I just decided I had to research a little bit more into this topic to figure out if there actually are already Valorant cheats, and it appears there are, but I haven't seen them being sold anymore or anywhere that you can possibly buy. So for now, I don't think it'll be that easy for any scrubs to get their hands on it, so for now, I think Valorant is in the green. Now, the next topic that we will be going over is going to be the economy of these two games, and I personally will have to give it to CS, and my kind of opinion is going to be a little bit subjective, even though the economy is kind of entirely based on quantitative data, but let me get into it. So Valorant tried to take a lot of the economy-based systems of CSGO and they try to implement it in their own way, but the way that the weapons just are, they are quite similar. Even the SMGs feel a lot like the rifles. While in Counter-Strike, there's a massive difference between the rifles and the SMGs. The AK and the UMP feel entirely different. There's just a massive gap between what kind of scenarios you can take on if you have an AK compared to a UMP. The ranges, their fire rates, just a bunch of different things that change the guns. While in Valorant, the SMGs or the cheap guns feel quite a lot like the rifles. For example, the Spectre, the $1,600 SMG, feels a lot like the Phantom, which is a $2,900 rifle. They feel a lot alike. Obviously, the SMG is going to be a little bit worse. It's not going to have quite as good damage, but overall, it feels a lot alike. It can be taken on in a lot of the same scenarios, while, for example, a weapon that's half the price of an AK, which is $2,700 in CSGO, will not perform nearly as well in almost every single scenario compared to that AK. So that kind of distinction makes your economy choices way more important in Counter-Strike Global Offensive, because if you make the wrong decisions, if you buy every round, you're going to get punished way more. Now, this is a little bit of subjective, as I said before, just because if you'd like the economy to be more hard-hitting, you have to make harder decisions overall, then you're definitely going to want to go with CSGO. But if you want it to not matter as much, you can buy every round, you don't really have to care as much about the numbers, you want it to be chill, then maybe you're going to want to go with Valorant. But overall, I think the harsher and more meaningful economy system of Counter-Strike is a little bit better than how Valorant has it, because the guns just feel a lot similar, which I'm going to have to go into in the next section. But overall, I think the economy in CSGO is better, especially because, the nades are way more expensive. $300, $200, $400 for, the smoke, the flash, and the Molotov respectively, while in Valorant, most of the abilities are only 100, 200, or 300 points at maximum. It's usually $100 to $200, which is quite surprising because, these are very, very powerful abilities that separate each character from each other, so you kind of want to give them a little bit more weight in the economy system. But the way it's set up now, it's like they're so cheap that why wouldn't you get them? It kind of takes away a very, very important decision that you could potentially make in terms of the economy system in Valorant, but sadly, it just makes all of these abilities super cheap, so why not buy them? I understand that this to kind of promote players using these abilities as much as possible instead of just buying guns over and over, but still, it kind of takes away an important decision, and we'll see how they kind of shift the economy later on. But for now, I would definitely say CSGO has a better shaped economy. Now this next section is going to be pretty much weapons and gunplay, and again I'm going to have to give it to Counter-Strike Global Offensive. Now granted, the weapons comparison is a little bit unfair because the majority of the weapons from Valorant are kind of copied off of those from CS, so obviously CS is going to definitely have the advantage because they kind of made the weapons, and therefore will have probably superior weapons, but pretty much the weapon design in CSGO is superb. All the weapons feel quite different, they all have different uses, they all have different reasons to pick them up over other weapons, and that kind of ties in with the economy being so good because with all the weapons feeling so different, you're going to have reasons to buy different weapons for different prices, and it's just going to kind of expand the economy and kind of expand which weapons you pick up. While in Valorant, the weapons don't feel too different outside of the LMGs and the shotguns, but of course those aren't really bought that often, so the weapons overall just don't feel and don't play that differently. And these themes kind of tie in with the gunplay in CS versus the gunplay in Valorant. In CS, they have very robust recoil. If you memorize the recoil pattern, you will be great at using that weapon, while in Valorant, it's kind of an incredibly simple recoil pattern for the first 10 or 15 shots, and then it's kind of random horizontally, which makes interesting plays like spray transfers kind of obsolete, among other things. Obviously, of the two, Valorant is kind of aiming more towards being a more casual game compared to CS, which is all-out competitive. Valorant is kind of trying to be competitive and casual at the same time, which certainly has its benefits. It definitely attracts a larger crowd because everybody doesn't want to play the most competitive game of all time, but on the other hand, kind of hurts the authenticity of the competitive gunplay by dumbing down the mechanics to appeal to a larger and more casual audience. And pretty much all of this boils down to not a bad game or not a bad competitive FPS game at that, but more so one that doesn't feel quite as solid as Counter-Strike in the competitive aspect, but definitely will appeal better to more casual players, which is good in its own right if you like playing in a casual way. Now the final topic that I'll be going over in this video is the support that keeps the game alive from the developers to make sure they keep pumping out content and making sure the game is as balanced and enjoyable as possible. This one is definitely going to have to go to Valorant. Now Valve isn't exactly the most neglectful company when it comes to Counter-Strike. They definitely are for TF2 though, they haven't released a major update in more than 3 years. But for CSGO, they do tend to add their odd balance change and new map every so often to keep players playing and excitement from dying down too low. Though this isn't always the case, especially when it comes to game balance. If you didn't already know, there's a massive meta that a lot of people were complaining about for ages in CSGO. It was called the SG meta, and it was when the SG-553, a gun that was barely more expensive but way more accurate, as well as had a scope and easier recoil, was barely more expensive, which led pro players to have to keep buying this over and over to keep their competitive advantage. It just made a lot of people angry because it was kind of, ruining the balance of the game around being based around the AK, and just generally kind of hurting how the meta was set up previously. They didn't change this for ages and ages until Valorant Beta came out, and they're like, hey, why not do this right when everybody's excited about the other games so we can get a few people back? That would make sense as a business decision, but in terms of keeping the game alive and keeping the game supported, CSGO is probably not your best bet, while Valorant, on the other hand, has Riot helping them. While League of Legends isn't exactly the most balanced game in the world, they have hundreds of characters, they have so many updates and so many things they have to balance, and Riot does it well. Again, it's not perfectly balanced every time, but they do try their best and they do release a lot of updates, which definitely helps the game stay exciting and stay balanced, which is a necessity for a competitive game. If you want your game to stay competitive, you can't let small balance changes get in the way of destroying the meta. Cough cough, mass AUG meta. Riot certainly can stay on top of their competitive games and know how to keep a game alive and fresh, which is why on a single map in League of Legends, Summoner's Rift, they've kept the game alive and well for years and years and years on a single map, so they kind of have the caliber to do this kind of thing for Valorant. So yeah, that is why the support core point is definitely going to Valorant. And yeah, that is pretty much all the points we're going to go through in this video. If you haven't looked at the tally yet, it is 6-5 to CSGO, which is incredibly surprising. Valorant, which is Riot's first attempt at making a competitive shooter game, has actually gotten nearly as many points as CSGO, which has been in the industry for ages and ages and ages. A lot of the things that bent it towards CSGO's favor could easily be changed by Riot, like performance and stability, so we'll have to see how it changes in the future, and maybe even Valve's gonna make some changes. Maybe they're gonna make their game less cheater friendly, which they expect to do. Maybe they're gonna make the game more easy to get into by adding a tutorial potentially. They're probably never gonna do that, but if they did, they'd get a few more points, and overall, there's just a lot of changes that can happen in the coming months to truly decide which is the best competitive FPS you should be playing and you should spend your time into. And yeah, that is pretty much it. Counter-Strike Global Offensive versus Valorant, battle for the best competitive FPS. That has been it. Thank you guys all so much for watching. Tell me which game you think should have won in the comments below and explain why. And I'll see all of you guys in my next video. Like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, or if you don't, I don't discriminate. And yeah, peace.
Oh, I guess.